Most people have walked past this plant 100 times and never looked twice, and that is exactly what makes it one of the stranger economic stories in American herbalism right now. It grows where nobody plants it, comes back every spring without encouragement, and small monasteries alongside specialty herb producers across the Northeast are currently harvesting it by hand, drying it in open-air sheds, and moving it to wholesalers for prices that can reach $40 a pound or more. Harvesting it from public land without a permit in many states will earn you a fine. Picture yourself standing in a monastery herb garden in western Massachusetts, sometime in late June. The air carries cut grass and something faintly mineral underneath it. No greenhouse, no irrigation, just wooden drying frames and a shed with the north wall left open to pull a steady current of air through. On those screens sits a plant that medieval infirmaries relied on for wounds, that early American households boiled into wound rinse, that the Shaker community at New Lebanon processed and sold commercially to physicians across the Northeast in the 1840s, and that modern researchers now test against inflammatory pathways. Your backyard fence may be producing it at no cost whatsoever. Before this video ends, the exact plant, the monastery harvesting system, the honest science, and a practical home method will all be on the table. Somewhere between $40 and $80 leaves most American households every month on herbal capsules and wellness products, and a meaningful portion of that goes toward compounds the body has drawn from simple plant sources for centuries. By the middle of the 20th century, the old habit of gathering and preparing those plants had been quietly set aside in favor of the bottled version. Not banned, not suppressed, just made unnecessary. A capsule was faster, and a printed label felt more trustworthy than a dried bundle hanging in the kitchen corner. Monasteries kept on using the old methods because nothing gave them a reason to stop. A working monastery runs on a fixed budget and a calendar that repeats without variation, which means anything that grows reliably, prepares without machinery, and stores without refrigeration will always outlast anything that needs to be ordered and restocked. The system did the work, and the brothers simply maintained it. Not a story about poverty or limitation, but about a household economy that never needed replacing. The plant is stinging nettle, known botanically as Urtica dioica, and its reputation for burning skin on contact has probably cost it more respect than anything else in its history. Benedictine abbeys listed it among their primary wound and infirmary herbs. English cottage households boiled young nettle tops into spring tonic straight through the 16th century, and the Shaker operation at New Lebanon, New York, turned it into commercial product that reached physicians and pharmacies across the region. Hildegard of Bingen, the 12th century Benedictine abbess whose medical writings still survive in translation, documented nettle in her Physica, noting that newly sprouted shoots purge and cleanse the stomach when cooked, and that the plant's warming nature could counter what she called bad humors. Her descriptions read like a practical nurse's notes rather than mystical writing, built from daily infirmary use rather than tradition. Nicholas Culpeper, working in 17th century England, described nettle for chest complaints, cold body, and stopping external bleeding, drawing on the same long tradition of monastery practice that had already tested the plant through generations of actual use. None of that history came from people trying to preserve old customs. They were solving the same problems every household faces: inflammation, seasonal illness, nutritional gaps in early spring, wound care without a physician within a day's ride, and nettle required no cultivation and only labor to process. That is exactly why monastery practice kept it long after the rest of the country moved on. The science on nettle is genuinely mixed, and repeating the inflated claims that circulate online would not serve anyone well. What can be said with confidence involves three specific documented mechanisms. Nettle leaf carries lectins and flavonoids that interfere with inflammatory signaling pathways, And a 1990 randomized double-blind study published in Planta Medica put freeze-dried nettle leaf against placebo in 98 people with allergy symptoms, with the majority rating nettle superior to placebo on global assessment. Milder than a pharmaceutical antihistamine, without question, but the effect registered clearly enough to be measured. Raw nettle leaf also delivers iron, calcium, magnesium, and vitamin C in concentrations that compare favorably per gram to spinach, which explains why wartime German records reached for it as a nutritional substitute when supply lines failed. The third mechanism is the one that catches most people off guard. The same compounds responsible for the sting appear to produce a counter-irritant effect when applied deliberately to arthritic joints, and a 2000 randomized controlled trial in the Journal of the Royal Society of Medicine followed 27 patients with osteoarthritic thumb pain and found scores dropped significantly more with nettle sting than with placebo. Specific, testable, and reproducible. Chemistry, not folklore. The spring pot young nettle shoots harvested before the plant flowers can be blanched and used exactly like cooked spinach, with the sting deactivating inside 30 seconds of heat. Avoid harvesting after flowering, which typically arrives in late June because the chemistry shifts in ways that can irritate the kidneys in quantity. Gloves at harvest, 60 seconds of blanching, and the cooking water saved as mineral broth. That covers the method. The drying frame. Monastery herb sheds paired open frame screens with a north wall left open for airflow because moving air carries moisture away from the leaf surface before mold can establish, while shade prevents ultraviolet light from breaking down the active compounds. Bunching the herb in tight clusters lets the center retain moisture while the outer leaves finish drying, which means mold wins before the job is done. A window screen across 2 chairs, a box fan on low, and a shaded corner replicate the function of a monastery drying shed, and 48 hours usually brings the leaf to crumbling clean dryness. The infusion cup. Dried nettle leaf steeped in water just off a full boil, covered for 8 to 10 minutes, produces the preparation that monastic tradition across Europe uses as a spring tonic, documented in herbal records reaching back to the medieval period. Boiling rather than steeping degrades the more delicate flavonoids, so the covered steep is the right method. 1 to 2 teaspoons per cup yields something deep green, slightly earthy, and milder than most people expect. The root preparation. Nettle root carries a different chemical profile than the leaf, and monastery practice uses it specifically for urinary and prostate concerns among older community members. A German multi-center study published in 2004 in Urology followed 246 patients over 12 months and found statistically significant improvement in symptom scores with nettle root extract compared to placebo, with the likely mechanism involving root lignans binding to sex hormone-binding globulin. Leaf and root are not interchangeable. Root harvest belongs to autumn after the plant dies back, followed by complete drying and preparation as a decoction rather than a steep. None of this replaces a physician or clears every supplement from the shelf. But the question worth sitting with is how much of what gets purchased and swallowed each month could be addressed by a plant already growing 20 feet from the back door, given only the knowledge of which one, when to pick it, and how to prepare it. Identifying the plant before touching it means looking for oval toothed leaves covered in fine white hairs on a square stem, a combination the free apps iNaturalist and PlantNet will confirm from a photograph in under 2 minutes. Checking the harvest location before cutting anything protects against a real legal problem, because most federal public land requires a permit and state rules vary considerably by land type. Setting up a drying station takes a window screen, 2 chairs, a fan on low, and a shaded room. Starting with the cooking use rather than the medicinal one, blanching a handful of young leaves 60 seconds alongside a familiar green builds direct knowledge of the plant before anything else. That sequence is the monastery order of operations applied to a modern kitchen. Skepticism was the starting point, and it held for a while. Standing in a demonstration herb garden for 10 minutes before understanding what was in front of me felt about right, because the plant looked like an aggressive weed and behaved like a mild hazard. What shifted things was a bowl of nettle soup with rye bread handed over by a monastery herb master, and the difficulty of reconciling the plant on the screen outside with what had just been eaten. By the third week of testing the dried leaf infusion alongside a normal morning routine, the comparison had become clear enough to take seriously. Not dramatic, just consistent. This works. It costs almost nothing, and it has been growing outside the window the whole time. The modern world operates on the assumption that a plant this common cannot carry anything worth using. The old families and monasteries never accepted that premise. They watched the spring come in, cut the young shoots before anyone started planting, and set the kettle on. One identification, one handful, one pot, that is enough to start. Leave a comment with the state you are watching from, and whether a creek bank, a fence line, or any wild edge runs near your home, because knowing whether nettle already grows where you live shapes everything that comes next.